Welcome to our second book lunch. That's the theme song, which is sort of I almost have the theme song. That's about as close as I'm going to get to one. Today, I got to get some things organized here. I hope the sound is good and everybody can hear everything. Today we're going to discuss a book that's I'm always trying to find the right word, and it takes time. You know, I don't like to just babble or I'm speaking extemporaneously and spontaneously by virtue of what I'm doing, but it's a but coming. Even be that as it may, I like to sort of choose my words with some care, and so I'm trying to find a way to talk about Nathalie Leger. I hope I'm doing justice to her name. Nathalie Leger. Book, Suite for Barbara Loden. Now, there's so much to get into. I fear that this particular book lunch will be a long lunch. And so I hope that you go along on this particular journey with me, relatively unafraid and open to what I'm going to talk about. Yes. So here's the thing. Cinema. So this May, and my producer Laurie will know the answer to this, is my blog post going up on May 2nd, which would be Monday. She would know, but I think May 2nd, I'm releasing this long love ode to cinema. And I'm really proud of it. I wrote it some time ago. I wrote it in a very unusual time in my life. It was a time in which one of my last years living in Boston. So it was a time in which I was watching a maximum amount of movies. It was that peak period. I was seeing maybe 4 or 5 movies a week, roughly, say somewhere between 4. And they were all good. I wasn't watching crap. I was like really enriching movies, and I was thinking deeply about them. And this is a long way of talking about the 70s book I'm writing, which Wanda figures a lot in. We'll get to that. But and I thought, I don't want the reader of this poem or this piece of prose I wrote to get the idea that I left out things on purpose that I like. There's a lot in here, but there's also a lot of things I'm crazy about I don't even mention. You can't, there's so much to cinema, so much to movies, film, that you have to leave some things out that you love. And so it's not everything's in there, but a lot of my favorites are in there. Directors, like Jacques Rivette and Bresson, and exploitation films from the 70s are in there, and major sex symbols are in there, like Claudia Jennings and the Marx Brothers, and there's also MGM musicals, and so there's enough in there to get a sense of how I relate to cinema. And I'm talking at great length about this piece only because so it's a good idea to talk about, first of all, somebody will ask you, like if somebody named Gus or Jane was here, let's just say, let's imagine a person named Gus, and you could put a microphone and say, Gus, when did you see E.T.? Or if you did see E.T. or Jaws, or when did you see Titanic and how many times, or something. I'm just pick random movies out of a hat, like a rabbit magician. I'm a magician pointing random. There's no significance to those titles. And they would say, well, I was at the Low Cineplex and I saw Titanic and I was on a date or something. And they might say they were with their family watching E.T. or something. I'm going to say that now. So I first saw Wanda rather late in life, actually. Now, this is interesting. It's a hard film to see. I wasn't able to really see the screenings that were available when they would pop up. This is sort of the era, I think, largely before. Well, I'm trying to think. I don't know if it was a good VHS copy at that time. It certainly wasn't a DV copy that was. I mean, I got one of the early ones in the early 2000s, I think, that was available. It's not like I had this fancy Criterion edition, which is really, really great. I mean, I can't recommend that enough for this. But you know, it was actually before the movie became like sort of a cult phenomenon. So I was an early adopter of Wanda. I was sort of, you know, I went to a screening in a class, an independent film class that Ray Carney was teaching. And I think it was like 8 in the morning. And, you know, I would sit in on some of these classes only if the film is really interesting or important. And Ray says, you got to see Wanda. So this must have been 1998, I think. And I went into this basement and I watched this film, and I got to tell you, I thought this film was incredible. I mean, I didn't even know. So here's the thing. When you love something, secondarily, you know, the object of your love or what it is you love that's certainly important because that's what causes the love, you know. I mean, you're not loving nothingness, although I think there's a place for loving nothingness. That's more of a spiritual discussion. But you know, we're talking about whether this book or this movie or a person, when you love something, it's kind of a challenge in a way to do it justice and, you know, to articulate why you love it or try to translate or express your love so that it's infectious and another person can love it. I mean, the mother of the woman that wrote this book, Natalie Leger's mom, said, why are you wasting your time on this depressing movie? I don't like that movie. Why are you writing a whole? And so a lot of people will respond to this way. Now, here's the thing. One of the grand themes of my book on 70s cinema is that in artistic creation, there are different styles. They're all equally good. And again, when I say there's these different styles, I'm not creating a hierarchy at all. And one style you could call conceptual or sort of masterful or classical. And that's where the work of art is about sort of expressing a very particular goal for the audience or for the reader. There's a clarity of expression. And some of the greatest things ever made fit into this category. They just, you know, there's not really a lot of ambiguity about what to take from the work. It's pretty clear, you know, the character of sort of its representational and their characters. It's pretty clear whether this person is someone to root for or not. There's a clarity, and this is, of course, a lot of art is like this, and it gets really even more complicated because to create a classical work of art like that is actually the hardest thing to do. It actually seems simple, since classical art, and the phrase I'm using the word classical very differently. You know, I mean historical, I mean traditional. People often think, well, that's easy because, you know, you have a good guy and a bad guy and everybody knows what that is. And just like comedy, right? People think that that's easy. Actually, that's some of the hardest stuff to do. And people that practice traditional art forms will tell you this is hard, you know, to do it well. So I'm just putting that out there. But I'm calling that kind of art conceptual, and that it's about aboutness. It's about the ideas of the world, right? As opposed to perceptual or sort of raw experience. And in the 70s, starting in the 60s and the 70s, movies became about senses, about perceiving rather than comprehension. Comprehension is secondary. It's not about putting forth a particular idea. It's about the actual experience with this group of people in this particular moment. And when you see Wanda, you're seeing a movie that was made with love by, again, this is a whole, you know, it's a movie, it's a bank heist movie, and there's crime in it, and there's a robbery, and it's about this woman from Pennsylvania getting involved with a criminal, and they become like sort of a Bonnie and Clyde sort of couple, and they go around doing petty crimes, and there's a lot of comedy and humor in their relationship because she calls him Mr. Dennis, and he's very eccentric and and you know, the repartee back and forth is a strange quality to the relationship that's again can't really be classified in an ordinary way. So Barbara Loden was up for the part of Faye Dunaway's part of Bonnie in Bonnie and Clyde, I think in 68, 69, and did not get the role. That role went to Faye Dunaway, of course. And so there's a sense in which this film, Wanda, is kind of her, I'm going to make my version of Bonnie and Clyde. It's thoroughly unclassical, meaning that, well, let me show you something here. We'll get to the book, don't worry. I know this is a book lunch and people don't get all upset. I understand that books are important and we're going to talk about sentences and prose. It's a book about a movie though, and about a person that worked in film. So, all right, now, let's see here. What are we doing? This is a very bad transfer, you know, so bear with me. Bear with me. I know, it's not supposed to. That's Wanda, that's Barbara Loden, that dot in the landscape. Yeah, dog barking. This is not like Bonnie and Clyde. I don't think there's a scene in Bonnie is any sequence like this. I love Bonnie and Clyde. Don't get me wrong. But that's another kind of movie. So when we meet Wanda, the fictional character that who Barbara Loden plays, she's in a bad job in a factory, has an abusive, but also sort of preposterous boss. She has to show up in court, and her husband is just so the, but you know, it presents. So this is the interesting thing, like Barbara Loden presents these things that you recognize from classical film, court conflicts, so divorce court, but she presents them in a thoroughly, I would say, poetic, non-conceptual way. In other words, it's almost like she wants you, again, to have the experience of a thing without intellectualization. It's something akin to being in this moment. Like right now we're having this, right now this is here, we're in this moment. Just like the scene I just showed you. And that's a whole tradition in radical art filmmaking that I deeply love. And I wish more people loved it like I do, but there we are. And she was into that stuff because around the time she made this film, she was checking out Warhol films and hanging out with Yoko Ono and very interested in all these things. And she put all those interests in this film. Also documentary filmmaking, Fred Wiseman, the Maysles brothers. That's a whole tradition where the idea is to capture the souls of the people you were photographing or documenting. And that you don't want to interfere with them too much. You want to plant your camera, and sort of be receptive to what's going on in your environment rather than manipulating it And so there's a lot of things coming together in Wanda. There's ideas about documentary filmmaking where you try to not interfere with your subjects, but respect them, respect their soul, actually. Very interesting. Her long career as an actor, respecting the space of the actors, very important in this film. And all these different elements come together in a very special film. It's very unusual. You don't usually have films, where all of these very actually disparate elements. I mean, there are artistic filmmakers who are not acting oriented at all. And there's some, that's not their main, or they're not actors. And it's more about landscape, or it's more about beauty, or it's more about certain kinds of emotions or shots. And then there are some films that are like Cassavetes, which is all about the actors doing their thing. And that's what's important in the film. In this film, it all comes together, which is really incredible. So it's both an abstract film, almost a visually abstract, almost non-narrative film. And at the same time, it's a thriller. It's sort of an action film. And at the same time, it's a drama of these two people that meet, both lost souls that find each other. And again, this guy's not a good guy, this Mr. Dennis. But he's not just a villain. That's the thing. See, that's what I love about this film. Like, she's not operating under the it's really hard to articulate. But again, who articulates it really well, much better than I can, is Natalie Leger in this book. So I don't know where to proceed. I want to talk about some things. I guess I could read passages from the book. Now, this is really interesting. Now, she tried to do a lot of research, and she did do a lot of research, but there were a lot of obstacles. For example, she wasn't able to get to journals. She wasn't able to get to archival material. She tried to do this. Who was really helpful, though, was Fred Wiseman. The great filmmaker Fred Wiseman said to Natalie Leger, you have to talk to Mickey Mantle, the baseball player. Mickey Mantle, what's the connection? Well, at the end of this book, and again, still read the book. It's not that kind of book. I'm not giving, it's a lot in here. Mickey Mantle was a fan of hers when she was a chorus dancer at the Copacabana in the 40s. So dig this. Barbara Loden, by the time she meets Wanda in 1970, had already been on Broadway, been a chorus dancer at the Copacabana in the 40s, and hung out with people like Mickey Mantle, the baseball player. So you could say that in a sense, when she makes this one movie, that she actually puts more, I'm going to say something bold, that there's more wisdom about the world that goes into this one film than most people ever even have. And that's actually, I think that's why the film's so good. It's not the only reason, but I think that I don't know whether you want to call it experience or kind of savvy, it all goes into this film. Even though it seems like a very minor film, and even though it seems like a very uneventful film in many respects, right? So I don't know, but Mickey Mantle, anyhow, Natalie Leger talks to Mickey Mantle, and Mickey Mantle, there's this long digression where he says, well, I want to write that, these people are hassling me to write a memoir. And this is Mickey Mantle just a few years ago, right? This is like him, I don't know, he's in his 80s or something. He's like, everybody wants a sports memoir. And dig this, Mickey Mantle, people want me to write about, all my victories and all my girlfriends and my marriages. But you know what I'm interested in? I want to write about the science of the baseball moving through space. I want to write about that. But my editor doesn't want me to get it. And this gets even more interesting. You know who Mickey Mantle was reading to learn how to write? He was reading Proust. Mickey Mantle. Probably never read anything like that before in the 30s and 40s when he was coming up. But he says, I discovered this guy Proust. So you imagine that, how many sports legends, are getting tips on how to write their celebrity bio from reading like Proust. See, this is the thing. See, the arts is funny. It's like it's just funny. I don't know. That's why I have this podcast, is things like that, right? So I don't really know. There's a lot of passages in. So she was supposed to write like what you would call those things where you write a biographical. They had those indexes and those encyclopedias where you have the name of Barbara Loden. She was supposed to write one of those things, like a summary. And the stuff she was turning in was too abstract or far out, and the editor was getting frustrated with Natalie Leger and saying, "Leave out all this stuff." And so she gets the idea. She's being blocked from certain information. Why don't I write a personal book about my love for this particular film with which she is obsessed, and this actress, right, Barbara Loden. And the result of all of these things coming together is this wonderful book. But anyhow, there are passages in this book that sort of read a little bit like, a biographical encyclopedia entry, right? So, but here's how she distorts it. She goes, I find out that when she was 15, Barbara Loden could have been crowned Miss Black Mountain, Miss Patriotic Bikini, a Princess Boondock. Why not? She always said that North Carolina, where she was born, was hillbilly country. She escaped from there when she ran off to join Robert Brown's Science Circus, where she earned $3 a show doing acrobatics to demonstrate simple laws of applied physics. She arrived in New York in 1949, 17 years old, and already quite knowing when it came to men. As Candy Loden, that was her name originally, I think, Candy Loden. Her stage name for these. She posed for photo novellas and women's magazines. Here she is on the cover of Photorama, illustrating the story Where to Find a Girl, in the classic pose of the 1950s pinup girl wearing a bathing suit, her hair a luxuriant blonde mane, her legs folded beneath her, looking directly at the camera with a knowing smile, though we can be quite sure that this knowing look conceals its opposite, the not knowing anything at all. It's the same pose that Marilyn Monroe holds without the bathing suit in the photographs that Tom Kelly took for a calendar in 1949. Now, this question of not knowing, I talked about concepts. Concepts is like knowing. And so this idea, and I think there's a connection here. The idea of doing things without knowing them, or doing things in order to discover something unknown. I think there's something to that. And also her rich life experience, And so she does Arthur Miller's After the Fall, playing a character, Maggie, who is patterned after Marilyn Monroe. And so I found out here in this great Susan Sontag book. Sontag, of course, gives a bad review to Elia Kazan and Arthur Miller's After the Fall, and is not too kind to Barbara Loden, too. She says here, what does she say? Here. One is jarred again at the sight of Barbara Loden, made up like Marilyn Monroe, displaying the mannerisms of Monroe and bearing a certain physical resemblance to Monroe, though lacking the fullness of figure needed to complete the illusion. But perhaps the most appalling combination of reality and play lies in the fact that After the Fall is directed by Elia Kazan, well known to be the model for the colleague who named names before the Committee of House of Un-American Activities. Now that gets into a whole thing about the 50s and McCarthyism, and Susan Sontag is referencing that partly to this is complicated because we're dealing with the 50s, the 60s. Now I was born too late. I would have given anything to see that production of After the Fall in 1964. If you give me my time machine, I want to go back and watch that production, as flawed as it is. And even though Susan Sontag takes the producers of the play to task for not casting somebody, casting somebody with Barbara Loden's particular physique, etc., on and on and on. I don't care about any of that. I love Susan Sontag, but I don't even care really what she thinks. I just think it's interesting, the kind of the juxtaposition of all these things. And, I'm left to thinking about this book, to write a book about a movie like that, to write a book about a movie in the idiosyncratic way in which Natalie Leger writes a book about the movie is, well, I sort of think ideally so wouldn't it be interesting if every biography was like this biography? I mean, of course you could carry it too far. I mean, I get it. You need you need a sort of a reference book. Although this is actually good as a reference. There's a lot of facts in here. But I just want to, there's a lot of passages where, I'm trying to find this one here. She traces all the steps of the movie. So she does reporting in the United States, leaves France, and goes to Pennsylvania and tries to recreate the locations that were used in the film Wanda, which is a very interesting thing to do. And there's a passage here where she talks about she talks about GPS and the use of GPS, because this book was written at a time when GPS was first being used, and how she doesn't like the fact that you can't get lost. Like, she wants to get lost. Natalie Leger, like Mitch Hampton, like me, wants to sometimes get a little bit lost and not know everything, and not pre-plan everything, and create some suspense, and not reduce everything down to like a good guy or a bad guy, and these kinds of very, the actual territory and not the map. And so she talks about that a little bit. So this is very interesting. She says here, in Carbondale, I asked one of the waitresses at the diner where I had stopped by for the evening how the mines work. That's mining country where this film takes place, and that's why. So I'm talking about how they work. Looking apologetic, she beat a retreat toward the kitchen, disappeared, and like in the theater, another waitress simultaneously appeared and walked straight toward me, wiping her hands and offering only a sallow, smiling profile with the wordless invitation to pick up the conversation where it had been left off. She was older, she ought to know. Her daughter worked in the mines. In an office further south near Frackville, she sat down opposite me and patiently explained how, when the overburdens are not too thick, the mine can be exploited by open cast mining. She spoke slowly, gesturing with her hands. You dig, you shovel, you sift, you extract. Sometimes you use dynamite. You shove some more, and each new layer of coal, each new seam is uncovered, excavated, sifted, and shoveled aside, fashioning an itinerant landscape on the vast, devastated terrain. That's what I understood. The landscape is constantly being unmade in one place and reconstructed in another. And once the seam is exhausted, it gets filled in with the waste that once formed a high, dark embankment and is abandoned for another mine. I asked whether it be possible further to be no trace of a former pit. Laughing, she answered, almost cried out, thank goodness, yes. Sky, the ocean floor, the outline of land masses, rock, water, steam, the Earth's gravity field, lines, measurements, a shape, the time, what experts call the figure of the Earth. I don't want to know anymore. I allow myself to be guided. I don't understand the organized collusion of data, transformed into electromagnetic waves that come crashing mathematically into the rental car's black box to dictate my itinerary. I've muted the sound heading into this unknown country. I rely only on the image of the infinite ribbon unspooling on the GPS screen. No obstacles, a marvelous illusory continuity, the perfect representation of stupidity, what others might call an acceptable representation of reality. The magic box, the mechanic had told me. I had heard that GPS is altering our perception of our position in space and the way we travel from place to place. The very notion of an itinerary is problematic nowadays. Some people go so far as to believe that everything, including time and emotions, can be localized. It seems to be becoming increasingly difficult to accept that we don't always know exactly where we are. And by extension, it is becoming increasingly difficult to know exactly where we are. Now that's an incredible passage. Now this is a book about a movie, and that passage is just like, see, that to me is the sign of a really, really deep writer. Is that you take these elements like a woman's life and a movie you love, and there's an opportunity to go to this other place, and she does it. There's to bring it more back down to earth, or let's see here. There's just so much here. I beg the audience's patience because I am. This is kind of an interesting. Interesting thing because there's also a lot of stuff in this book about being a woman, and she talks about her life as a woman and a writer and her mother and of course Barbara Loden. It's just beautiful, but it doesn't. There's just so much here. Again, this is a tiny little book. I purposely chose a book totally contrary to Blake Gottnick's Warhol, yet the same time period, some of the same milieu. There's overlap, but that was a big book. This is a little book, but for a little book, this is this is almost like a 1,000-page book. There's a lot in here. Here we go. Barbara Loden said that she had no grand story to tell. No wind of history, none of the political turmoil of the times, nothing illustrative of any social drama. Poverty, perhaps, but not destitution. Violence, yes, but the acceptable face of violence, the kind of banal cruelty enacted within the family. That was all she said. Her own story, enmeshed in this one, is probably no more than the ordinary story of a lonely, unloved child, a child who had been silenced, forced to submit to someone stronger than they are. The kind of sadness that it is not easy to get over, a commonplace story. This is the only reason Barbara made films: to soothe, to heal the pain, assuage the humiliation, process the fear. Quote, this is Barbara Loden's quote, "Wanda's character is based on my own life and on my own character, and also on the way I understand other people's lives. Everything comes from my own experience. Everything I do is me." Unquote. So I guess to read this book, you have to have seen the movie, I guess. And I think, but then again, yes, I guess, you could read the book. I don't know, what would this book read like? I mean, actually, there's so much in here about Mickey Mantle and about baseball, and not baseball, but about the politics of Hollywood and Elia Kazan's life. There's actually a lot in here you can actually read and sort of enjoy. But there's a lot of reconstructions of scenes from the film, almost like she summarizes what's happening on screen, and she does it in her poetic way. So I don't know if I made myself clear when I talk about perception and conception, and it might sound a little ironically itself very conceptual and abstract. But it's a very basic thing. And I sort of feel like that in this movie, Wanda, Michael Higgins and Barbara Loden get into this stuff as actors, and she never edits it. She just leaves it all in. There's this passage in the film where they discover model airplanes, and they look up at the sky, and there's these beautiful airplanes, and just like everything stops, and they're hanging out in this car. And it's a lot of, I mean, the film is just a series of these kinds of, you know, these passages, and it's actually, I would say the movie's about that. I would say if one is about anything other than, of course, the plight of its character, Wanda, it's about, I think, the primacy of immediate raw experience in the senses. And in addition to that, that every human being matters. It's implicit in the film. The way the film, there's a scene where there's a scene towards the end where they're in a bar and it shows all the people in the bar. There's a kind of a democratic majesty about that. And so in essence, Barbara Loden in an interview at AFI says it's a crude film. She calls her film crude by the standards of Hollywood, technical brilliance, classical brilliance. She says it's crude. I'm aware it's crude. She says it's like Warhol. She compares herself to Warhol. But I think that its crudeness is beautiful. And I actually think, I talk a lot about the quotidian. And again, this style of film, the idea of every life mattering, the idea of the moment mattering, is still, I think, even in 2022, even though it's starting to become more mainstream and accepted by a larger audience, thankfully, and there's more openness to this idea, it's still a very radical idea because our culture in general is committed to the dramatic or as being the only thing that matters, or the thing that's the loudest, or the thing that's commands the most attention. And it's actually, but I don't want to get into all that now. But I love this book, and I kind of make an idea here that it'd be interesting to see books about subjects in the world more like this book. And so this book is why I changed direction in my 70s book. It's going to be totally different because so I have her, Natalie Jerry, to thank for giving me the idea. Wouldn't it be interesting if I write a book about all the movies of the 70s, but using her approach? What do you think? You think that's a good idea? So this book inspired me in a very direct and a very what's the word? Immediate way. So that's it for this book lunch. It took a lot out of me because this movie takes a lot out of you, and those passages about Barbara Loden's life and about are serious and but they're important and it's beautiful, and that's what art is about. Art is taking all these things that seem disconnected, growing up in Black Mountain or being in a beauty pageant or working at the Copacabana and being in a play on Broadway or whatever, or working in television, all these things. And that's kind of like the raw material, right? It's like a chord or a scale, and you take it all and you put it all together, and then you put all these disparate things, and